So here we are, we're out by the pedestal grinders. For this beginning of the demonstration, I'm not going to be wearing my face shield, but when we're actually operating the pedestal grinders, you will be required to wear a face shield. The first thing I want to do when I walk up to any machine tool is I want to go over my own personal protective equipment. So of course, I'm already going to have on my safety glasses, I'm probably going to have in my earplugs, and I will have removed all my jewelry and any watches, bracelets, anything like that. Another thing that students commonly look over is lanyards for keys. They'll have those kind of things hanging out of their pockets. Strings from sweatshirts, things of that nature. Just, you don't want anything hanging off your body that doesn't need to be there, that can get caught up in a rotating piece of equipment. Because this grinding wheel, rotating at a couple thousand RPMs, will wind up your clothing and be pulling you in before you even know that it has gotten caught. So if we minimize all of the potential hazards, it's highly unlikely that we're going to be injured. Now, covering our own personal protective equipment, we can move on to the actual grinder. The first thing I want to do when I walk up to a grinder is, obviously with it turned off, I want to gently rotate the grinder wheel, and I'm looking for any signs of obvious damage. Now, what I'm really talking about is a corner that's knocked off of either wheel. Now, I don't think that anybody would intentionally break a grinding wheel and then hide it and not tell anybody. But sometimes people carry long objects, big pieces of material, while they're inside a shop, and maybe they don't realize the swing radius and they bump into something. They look over their shoulder, nothing got knocked over, they assume they didn't cause any harm, but they could have knocked out a chunk of this grinding wheel. If that were to have occurred, then on the next time this grinder was started up, the wheel itself could separate, because all this grinding wheel is thousands of small little particles held together with glue. So in the event that they come apart, it can be a catastrophic failure. Now, what we have to protect us, the operator, from injury if a grinding wheel were to have come apart is, again, we'd have our face shield on when we're going to grind, and then we're also going to make sure that the side shield, our tongue guard, and our tool rest are in place. Now, the tool rest itself is always having to be adjusted to be able to maintain a close, very minimal gap to the face of the grinding wheel. The tongue guard can have up to a 1/4 inch gap. Now what this guard up here is going to do is that keeps our sparks that are being formed as we're removing the material from coming around and coming out the front, and then also in the event that a wheel does let go of itself, that's going to keep the chunks hopefully maintained inside the side of the grinder. I do not think that's going to happen, but we always treat everything in regards to safety with the highest, most importance. So we're always going to be looking. Now, in the event that you walk up to a grinder inside any shop and you notice some sort of damage or broken or removed guard, what you want to do is immediately unplug that piece of equipment. And if you have access to lockout, tagout, lock covers, you'd want to hang one on there while whatever repair had to take place was being performed. So before you work on any equipment, you always neutralize the energy sources. The students at LCC do not do that kind of maintenance on the equipment, but it's always worth mentioning when it comes up. So the grinding wheels themselves, we should only be grinding on the face of the wheel, and we should only be grinding approved materials. So it's quite common for students, this is just a sample cutting tool, it's quite common for students to come over to the grinder and start grinding away on a chunk of aluminum on our pedestal grinders. What happens is the aluminum is too soft and it clogs up or loads up the grinding wheel surface. Usually they figure out that something's not going like it should, and then they stop because a light bulb goes off in their head and they say, I'm not supposed to grind aluminum right here. But you know, if it happens, just let me know. I'll come over with the wheel dresser and we'll get it cleaned off. Now the next thing besides only grinding on the face of the wheel with the correct material, is again, just to stress that we don't grind on the sides of the wheels. So what we can do is every time you're grinding, it's going to be removing material, and you can end up with an undercut section on the wheel, which means it has a corner that's more likely to break off. So that's why we don't grind on the sides of the wheels, and we obviously don't grind, don't start sticking stuff underneath the tool rest. Now, what I allow students to dress the wheel with is just one of these tungsten carbide dressing blocks, and when you use one of these, what you're actually doing is just removing the loaded, clogged up grinding wheel, and you're exposing new cutting surfaces. It's always in your best interest to be using a sharp cutting tool, especially when you're grinding drill bits or sharpening high-speed steel lathe tools. It's going to make the process take less time, you're going to get a better finish, and it's just, there's no sense in using dull cutting tools. So the proper way to dress a wheel with the grinder turned on would be to lightly, with light force, come up against the face of the wheel and then gently move the stone back and forth. What you would see if this wheel was spinning is, if it's a loaded up wheel and it needs dressed, is the surface will kind of look black and shiny. After a couple seconds with the cleaning stone, the surface will look flat gray or a matte finish. The shininess will go away. At that point, you know that you've removed you've cleared out the pores, the cutting edges, so you have good cleaning, good cutting surfaces exposed. Something I skipped over is the actual turning on of the grinder itself, and you're going to see me do this on video, is before I turn on the grinder, after I've already checked that I have on my own personal protective equipment, that the grinder is in safe working order, is I will stand off to the side, meaning not directly in line with my grinding wheels, and then I'll reach over and I'll flip the switch on. I'll let the grinder come up to speed. After it has, then I will step back in front of the grinder and start working on whatever tool I have. The reason for that, again, is during that initial startup where it's gaining its RPM, if there was some sort of damage, then you would not be standing directly in line with the wheel if it were to come apart.